The thing about pressure is that pressure can be destructive, right? Like I think about those things that crush cars. I don't know what they're called, but they're cool, right? Like they crush down and the car just kind of gets flattened into nothing because pressure can be destructive. I think of the ocean. And I'm terrible at science, so don't understand how this works, but if you put like a pop can at the bottom of the ocean, it gets crushed, because even like a submarine that's not pressurized right will get crushed by the pressure of the ocean, because pressure can destroy. This is one of the reasons why it's not advisable to power wash in sandals. Because if you misdirect the pressure of the power washer, you may get a new nickname, Johnny Nine Toes. Pressure can be destructive, but pressure can also reveal and refine. You think about a diamond. A diamond is revealed and refined by pressure. I don't know, again, I'm terrible at science, it has to do with carbon, coal, I don't know, but it's the pressure. I like cooking with a pressure cooker. You all know that I love crock pots, right? Crock pots are my thing. I love long, taking time to get a great meal. But now you have these pressure cooker things that do what a crock pot does in like a third of the time. It's great. But that pressure cooks the food, and it's still moist, and it's still delicious. And pressure can make us better. Think of the distance runner who challenges themselves, put pressure on themselves to go further and further and further. Or any athlete. Or maybe when you're trying to get better at something, you put pressure on yourself to get better, because while pressure can be destructive, it can also reveal and refine us. Last week in Philippians, we saw how Paul was talking about some of the pressures in his life, and how those pressures were refining him. They were making him into the person God wanted him to be, but they were also revealing something. They were revealing Christ's work in him, but they were also revealing Christ to others, because Paul says, because of the pressure I'm facing, other people are coming to know Jesus. The gospel is spreading because of the pressure I'm facing. And so the gospel in Paul's life was not destructive, but was revealing and refining. And now as we continue to move through chapter 1, we're going to get to verse 27 and discover that Paul's going to shift gears. And now instead of talking about the pressure that he faces, he's going to talk about the pressure being faced by the Philippians. And he's going to teach them the exact same thing that he just talked about in the previous passage. He's going to say, the pressure you are facing will either destroy you or it will reveal and refine you. And that will depend on your relationship with Christ. So, if you have your Bible, open it up to Philippians chapter 1. We're going to start in verse 27 today, just 4 verses today, 27 through 30. If you have it on your phone or your tablet, you can do that, and we'll put the verses up on the screen as we go. Verse 27, Paul says, only, and we'll stop right there. Yeah, we're going to take this one word at a time today. I said just 4 verses, but one word, 4 verses. I hope you guys don't have plans this afternoon. Paul says only. And what he's getting at here is, hey, what I'm about to say is really important. In fact, this is the primary thing. It's the one thing that you need to be focused on. If we read it in the context of the chapter, Paul's been talking about his suffering and how he's anxious to see the Philippians, and he wants to give them gifts. And now he says, as you wait for that, only this, okay? Focus on this. This is the one thing. It's almost like he's saying just one thing, guys. One thing, pay attention to this. Now, what's funny about this is if there's any writer in the Bible who is incapable of only saying one thing, it's Paul. Because if you've read any of Paul's letters, you know this is the guy who he loves the run-on sentence. He cannot stay focused. The verses we're looking at today, 4 verses, it's one sentence in the Greek. But this is one of his shorter run-on sentences. In Ephesians, there is a 13-verse sentence. In Colossians, there's an 11-verse sentence. In Ephesians, there's another 11-verse sentence. He loves to, and so when Paul says, hey, just one thing, I kind of laugh inside. Because Paul never says just one thing. In fact, you've probably experienced this as you read some of Paul's letters. It can be really confusing. Peter even said that. Like Peter, who knew Jesus, is writing about Paul, and he's like, yeah, sometimes I'm reading Paul's letters, and they are hard to read. And the reason is because Paul's just all over the place. So I want to take we'll step aside just for a second. Let me give you kind of a helpful hint for when you're reading Paul's letters. and you're studying Paul's letters and you find yourself really struggling because he seems to be all over the place and it's hard to make sense of it, here's what I like to do. When Paul gets wordy, and that's all the time, when Paul gets wordy, look for clauses and connections. All right, what I mean by that is if you watch Paul, he'll have a clause here, and some of you are like, I did not come to church for a grammar class. I know, just at least I'm not diagramming the sentences, right? So he has clauses, so he'll have a clause here, and then he has a clause here, and then he has a clause here, and then he has a clause here. And if you try to divide his writings up into those clauses or those phrases, and then look for the words that connect them to each other, what you can do is you can discover, okay, what's the main thing he's trying to say here? And now how do all these other things apply? So I actually did that for us this morning. So we'll put this whole passage that we're looking at up on the screen, and you can kind of see it. So I highlighted the different clauses, and you can see there's 5 clauses in this sentence that he writes, okay? And then I circled the connecting words. And so really, that very first clause, the one we already said only, well, we only said only, but only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. That is his main point. So when he says just this one thing, what he's saying is, this is it, live your life worthy of the gospel. All right, and now you have all these clauses. So the first one starts with a so that. And a so that is an outcome word, right? So when we use that word so that, we're talking about outcomes. And outcomes means there's on one side of it, there's an action, and on the other side of it, there's an outcome. I brush my teeth every day so that they don't fall out of my head. Okay, right? So you see how that works. I need to stop eating ice cream so that I stop gaining weight. Okay, so action and outcome. And this is what Paul's doing here. So the second clause is an outcome clause. And then he says this to start that third clause. And really what he's doing is he's drilling down. We'll get to that in a minute. And then the next clause starts with a for. And the for is kind of a motivating or describing. This is the reason for something. That's what we often say. And that's what he's doing right here. He's saying, everything I've said up to you this point, this is the reason for it. And then he wraps up by linking it all back to the first thing he said, which was talking about his own suffering. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. We'll walk our way through this in a second. But let's kind of zero in for just a second on the big idea, because here it is. Paul wants the Philippians, and also us, to live our lives worthy of the gospel. That's it. That's just one thing. So if you walk away with anything today, just one thing, live your life worthy of the gospel. And that word worthy kind of indicates that, hey, Jesus has done something for you, so you should live accordingly. Because what is the gospel? The gospel is the truth that Jesus lived a perfect life, died an unjust death, rose again to conquer death and the grave, and now lives for us so that we can join him in eternity. That's the gospel. It's Jesus' work. It's not our work. And so because Jesus did this for us, we ought to live in a way that is worthy of him. That's it. It's simple. It's basic. We could go now and you would have the most important thing. So some of you, if you've got somewhere to go, you can go. You've heard what I need to say. Okay? The rest of the time is just me unpacking that. Yeah, Greg's like, all right, sweet, let's go. Now, I usually, when I'm up here, I'm usually preaching to you from the English Standard Version, okay? The ESV. And usually this is a really good translation. This passage, it's a good translation. You get the main point. But there's actually a translation that does a little bit better job. And I won't often do this, but there's some nuance in this verse that's really helpful to us when we think about what it means to live worthy of the gospel. So I'm going to show you what the CSB says, okay? So this is the Christian Standard Bible. Same verse. It reads a little differently, though. It says, just one thing. I like that better than only anyways. Just one thing. As citizens of heaven, live your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. So you see what this version does is it takes what the first one said. It says, let your manner of life, and it converts it to, as citizens of heaven, live your life. This is actually a more faithful translation. Because the word that is used is actually conduct yourselves as citizens would be the best translation. But the reason Paul is using that specific language is he wants the Philippians to hear the word citizen. Because their identity as Philippians was very much rooted in the fact that they were citizens of Rome, even though they were in Greece. You see, the city of Philippi was an outpost of the Roman Empire. It was a colony of Rome. And so the people in Philippi, they understood what it meant to be a Roman citizen, even though they didn't live in Rome. So they were loyal to Rome even though they weren't in Rome. But being a citizen of Rome, even if you weren't in Rome, carried with it privileges, and it carried with it expectations or responsibilities, okay? So the privileges were that they were protected by Rome. That was a pretty good deal. They also had legal rights and privileges that a lot of people didn't. They could own property when many people couldn't. They had protection in the courts that many people didn't have. In fact, if you remember in the book of Acts, when Paul is in Philippi and he's about to get beaten, one of his appeals is, hey, are you going to do this to a Roman citizen? And they knew what that meant because they were Roman citizens. And the soldier actually said, well, how much did you pay? I paid a lot for my citizenship. And Paul's like, I was born with it. All right, so the Philippians understand citizenship. They understand that citizenship carries privileges, but it also carries responsibilities. They are responsible to pay their taxes. Many of them were responsible to have to serve in the military. And so what Paul is saying, hey, you guys understand citizenship. And as citizens of Rome, you have privileges and you have responsibilities. And what he's saying in this verse is, you are also citizens of heaven. And the equation is almost the same. You don't live in heaven, but you're a citizen of heaven. You're living on earth, but you are loyal to heaven. And as a citizen of heaven, there are privileges and there are responsibilities. And what Paul is saying to them is, to live a life worthy of the gospel means this. If you've received the privileges of the gospel, then you must assume the responsibilities of the gospel. And this is true for every single one of us. If we want to live a life worthy of the gospel, then we must recognize we've received privileges from the gospel, right? We are now the daughters and the sons of God. We don't need a priest for us. We have a high priest who goes before us. Jesus has done for us what we could never do for ourselves. And because we have those privileges of being citizens of heaven, we must also assume the responsibilities. And now what Paul is going to do in the rest of this passage is help us understand exactly what that means. And all of his clauses and connectors will help us do that. So let's keep moving as we go. All right, so Paul says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you. Now, what he's saying is what? Remember, action, outcome. If you are living a life worthy of the gospel, then Paul says, then I will hear about it. Right? I want you to live a life worthy of the gospel so that I will hear about it. And now he's going to tell us specifically what it is that he will hear, because this helps us understand what a life worthy is. He says that I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. So Paul gives three ideas here of what it means to live a life worthy of the gospel. Number one, he says, stand firm. What does that mean? It means don't quit. When the going gets tough, don't quit. Stand firm. Don't turn and run. Stand firm. And the second thing is he says, if you're living a life worthy of the gospel, you are going to strive for the gospel. So standing firm means I don't quit. Striving means I keep moving. I keep moving ahead. I keep taking steps to be a person who is seeing the gospel spread around me. But notice, on both of these, he has this idea that they're doing it together. Do you see that? He says, you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind. So all of you together are standing firm. And then he says, and striving side by side. It's this picture of together. Now, this is what the kids would call an Easter egg. Okay? So if you're familiar with the Marvel universe, like all the Marvel movies that came out many years ago, there were all these little Easter eggs tucked into them. And what an Easter egg is, it's something in one movie that points to another movie. And so they get all excited, like, oh, there's this Easter egg here where Captain America does this, and it points back to this other movie where Captain America did that, or Iron Man does this. So that's what Paul's doing right here, is he's giving us a little Easter egg of what's to come in Philippians. Because what we're going to discover as we work our way through Philippians is one of Paul's biggest points to them is you got to do this together. You need each other. In fact, he's going to get to the very end of the book, and say, look, guys, this is how important it is that you need each other. You got to work hard at it. There's this fight going on in your church, and y'all need to step in and fix it because it's tearing you apart. We need each other. And Paul says if you want to live a life worthy of the gospel, you got to stand firm, you got to strive, but you got to do it together with other believers. And then he says the third thing that is a life worthy of the gospel is not being afraid. He says, not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is the pressure, right? This is where the pressure is coming. And Paul says, look, you're going to have pressure. As a follower of Jesus, there is going to be pressure applied on you. Don't be afraid of it. He's telling the Philippians, you got to win the battle in your mind. Because our natural inclination is to run from pressure. Our natural inclination is to avoid suffering, avoid pressure. Now, he's very specific about the kind of pressure he's talking about. He says, not frightened in anything by what? By your opponents. So he said, this is pressure that's coming on you from other people. He's talking about a culture that is opposed to what they believe and they do. Does that sound familiar? Do we live in a culture that is opposed to what we believe and what we do? Do we live in a culture that says, hey, you Christians, you're too intolerant. You're too exclusive. Why can't you just say your way is your way and my way is my way? That's pressure. We live in a culture that says your moral values are old-fashioned and outdated. That's pressure. And Paul says, don't be afraid of the pressure. But that's not the only place the pressure comes. Sometimes the pressure comes from other people within. Remember, that's what happened to him. He was talking just last week about the people who were proclaiming Christ kind of out of their own selfish ambition, and they were taking shots at him. And Paul's saying, I feel some of this pressure from other people who are mistreating me, and sometimes you will also. Sometimes the pressure comes from external circumstances. It's a health diagnosis. It's a relational issue. It's financial pressure. Sometimes the pressure comes from within. It's temptation that we're struggling to deal with. It's guilt and shame that should be in our past, but we keep going back to it. We keep getting dragged back into it because we haven't fully realized what it means that Christ has forgiven us. And all of this pressure comes on us. And Paul says, don't be afraid of the pressure. Because why? Because pressure doesn't have to destroy you. Pressure can reveal you. Pressure can refine you. In fact, that's what he's going to say next. In the next phrase, he says, this is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. What's Paul doing here? See, look, when you think about the pressure in your life, if you don't have Christ, that pressure will destroy you. But if you have Christ, if your belief in him is real, then that pressure will refine you. It will make you the person he wants you to be. This is what James says in James 1, right? He says, brothers and sisters, rejoice when you face suffering. That's counterintuitive. Why? Because it's through the suffering that God will make you mature and make you perfect and make you the person he wants you to be. Because the pressure refines the true follower of Jesus. You see, when the hard stuff comes into our life, it reveals our faith. If I run away when I'm under pressure, it reveals that maybe my faith was in something other than Jesus. But if I know that Jesus, through his work, through the gospel, has connected me with God, has made me a son of God, right? To everyone who believes in his name, they were given the right to become sons of God. Then I know that my Father is in control of all things. And my Father is more powerful than all things. And my Father knows all things. And my Father loves me more than I could possibly imagine. And if I know all that is true about my Father, then when earthly pressure comes on me, I can rely on him, that he knows what he's doing. And he will not let anything come upon me that I'm not ready for, that isn't going to shape me and refine me and make me who he wants me to be. And so Paul says, look, the pressure, it's destructive for those who don't believe, but it is salvation for those who do. Life's pressure either destroys people and drives them away from Christ, or it will drive us towards him. And now Paul is going to shift gears a little bit and give the Philippians motivation. He wants to motivate them to stand firm, to strive, to not be afraid under pressure. He says, right? The reason for this. It has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his loss. Look at that word granted. Something has been given to you. This is what he's saying. God has given you something. And remember, the big picture here is the picture of citizenship. Right? So just as you Philippians have been given citizenship in Rome, God has given you citizenship in the kingdom of heaven. And along with that citizenship comes two things, right? It comes with privileges and it comes with responsibilities. And so first, Paul is going to point out the privileges of what we've been given. So he says, for it has been granted to you that you should believe. You have been given belief. And now think about what that means. You have been given, think about how you knew Jesus. None of us on our own, just out of the blue, no other circumstances involved, woke up one day and said, I think I'll go find Jesus. Somebody came to you. Somebody told you about him. Somebody loved you like he loved you. You went through circumstances that drove you towards him. Whatever it was, there's always something you can look back in your life and say, yeah, that was what drove me towards Jesus. That is what drove me to believe in him. It's this beautiful gift that he gives us. And along with that gift comes salvation, because anyone who believes is saved. And so the moment that I believe, I get the privilege of salvation from the penalty of sin. Right? Because of my sin, I deserve death. Because of my sin, I deserve eternal separation from God. That's the penalty of sin. And the moment I believe, I receive the privilege of being saved from that penalty. I no longer have to fear death, because I know that death is just a doorway into eternal life. And I have the privilege of knowing that one day my salvation means I will be removed from the presence of sin. Don't underestimate this. We live in this world that is so broken and so messed up. And we see it every day in the brokenness of our bodies, and the brokenness of our relationships, and the brokenness of nature. And all of that is caused by sin. Sin has thoroughly broken this world. And sometimes we don't even recognize how much that has impacted us. But one day, if we believe, one day we will be removed from that. And we will be with God forever, and sin will be no more. And we will never experience brokenness again. Wholeness for eternity. That's one of the privileges of being a citizen of heaven. And while we wait for that, we are being saved daily from the power of sin. You see, if I truly believe in Jesus, and he is shaping me and he is forming me, often through pressure, but he is making me into the person that God wanted me to be. The power sin once had on me is diminishing as the power of Jesus is growing in me. These are the privileges of belief. And this is what Paul is saying. It has been granted to you that you should believe. That's the privilege of being a citizen. But remember, if I am going to have the privileges of citizenship, I must also assume the responsibilities of citizenship. So what does Paul say are the responsibilities? He says, it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should suffer. See, the responsibility for citizens of the kingdom is to suffer, and to suffer well. You know, we sometimes like to think that faith in Jesus is going to make everything perfect. And there are some people who like to preach that. That's actually a sermon that sells, right? You know, get more money in the offering, your life will get better. Bible doesn't say that. God never says that. Jesus never said that. Jesus said the opposite, right? Remember, right before he left his disciples, he said, hey guys, by the way, the world is going to hate you because they hated me, right? Suffering is baked into the Christian life because it's pressure. And it's through that pressure that God refines us and makes us who he wants us to be. And so Paul says, if you want to be a citizen of the kingdom, if you want to live a life worthy of the gospel, then be ready to suffer. Be ready for the pressure to come. And when it comes, receive it, stand firm, lean into it, strive through it. Don't be afraid of it because God has a purpose in it. You see, how I respond to suffering is a reflection of my faith. Jesus actually told a story about this. You guys remember the parable of the 4 soils? It's in Matthew 13. I'm just going to read it to you. And as I read it to you, I want you to listen specifically to what Jesus says about how people respond to pressure. Okay? So Jesus tells the story of the parable. The parable goes out, he sows 4 kinds of seeds. And then he says, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. So the first kind of soil is the path, and it represents people who just never believe, never will believe. They never understand. But the next 3 soils all represent people who hear the news of the gospel and who initially receive it. He says, as for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, pressure, when the pressure comes, he falls away. Jesus says there are some people, they hear the news of the gospel, and they receive it with joy. They think it sounds great, but as soon as the pressure of the world comes, they bail. And he goes on, there's another kind of soil. He says, as for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. This is a different kind of pressure. This is not suffering pressure. This is peer pressure. Looking around and seeing what other people have, seeing what other people expect, and living for their approval, living for the values of the world. And Jesus said that person also, when the pressure came, they fell away. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. So Jesus says there's all different kinds of people. Some people never accept the gospel, never receive it, never understand it. But there are a lot of people who hear the gospel, initially think it sounds great, but when pressure comes, they run. But he says there's one kind of soil, the good soil. They hear the gospel. They receive the gospel. They believe the gospel. And when the pressure comes, it makes them fruitful. It allows them to produce in their life what God created them to produce. And this brings us all the way back to where we started. Verse 27. Only, just this one thing, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. As a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, you have privileges. The privilege of belief and everything that comes with that. But you also have responsibilities because guess what? Pressure is coming. And so if I was going to try to sum all of this up this morning in just one thing, I would say this. Don't stop believing, even when you're under pressure. Now this is just a taste of what's coming in Philippians. Because as we dig into this book, we're going to see Paul talk more and more about how we deal with pressure, how we allow that pressure to shape us and form us and make us look like Jesus. There's going to be a great passage on that next week about how Jesus lived and what Jesus did. But let me wrap with this. This week, if you'll let it, if you will allow it, the pressure in your life will bring you closer to Jesus. It will allow your life to look more like Jesus because he suffered. And if he suffered, we should suffer. If he went through pressure, we should go through pressure. But even better than that, if you will allow it, the pressure in your life will point others to Jesus. Just like it did for Paul, just like it did for the Philippians, it can do that through us. So when you find yourself under pressure, don't stop believing. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the hard times. Thank you for the pressure that you bring into our lives to shape us and form us to look like you. Thank you for the pressure that you bring into our lives that reveals the things in our life that need to be cut away. And Father, this morning I pray for my friends who are here who are finding themselves in a time of pressure. Father, I pray that you would give them strength, that you would give them endurance, but that you would also give them wisdom and discernment, and that they could see what you are doing in them, so that eventually you'll do great things through them. Father, thank you for showing us through your Son what it looks like to go through pressure and to stay true to you. Help us to keep believing. In your name, amen.